What would you do if you witnessed a terrible injustice against someone you love? Would you act immediately, or keep that secret for years, allowing hatred to silently grow in your heart? Today, I will tell you a story that forever changed the destiny of Israel, a story of power, obsession, and a silence that cost an entire kingdom. A princess was destroyed, a brother plotted revenge for 2 long years, and a king. Well, a king chose not to see what was happening under his own roof. And you know what's the most shocking? All of this is recorded in the Bible, and the consequences of this omission were so devastating that they still echo today as a warning to all families. A story of wrong choices and deafening silence. The story I'm about to share is about how a series of wrong choices and deafening silence transformed the most glorious reign of Israel into a family battlefield. Let's dive behind the scenes of King David's palace, where his daughter Tamar, an extraordinarily beautiful princess, became the target of a sick obsession. We will see how a manipulative advisor planted the seeds of destruction, how a powerful father turned a blind eye to his own daughter's suffering, and how a brother transformed his protective love into the most calculated revenge. This is not just another biblical story. It is a warning about how silence in the face of evil can destroy not only a family, but an entire kingdom. Prepare to discover truths that go far beyond what you imagined about this biblical passage, and most importantly, to reflect on the price of omission in our own lives. Tamar, a princess of purity and obsession. Imagine a young princess, the daughter of the great King David, whose beauty was not only physical, but also radiated from her pure heart. Tamar was known not only for her stunning appearance, but also for her dedication to divine principles, always dressed in her colorful royal mantle, the symbol of the king's virgin daughters. But in the palace halls, this same beauty awakened a sick desire in her half-brother Amnon, David's firstborn. Amnon was not merely attracted, he was consumed. The Bible tells us that he was sick with passion for his own sister, to the point of wasting away day by day. His love was not love, it was an obsession that corroded him from within. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and his thoughts constantly revolved around Tamar. But there was a problem. She was his half-sister, and he knew he could never have her. Jonadab's deceptive scheme. This is where one of the darkest figures in this story comes into play. Jonadab, David's nephew, and Amnon's cousin. The Bible describes him as a very shrewd man, but his shrewdness would not be used for good. Seeing his cousin and friend wasting away, instead of advising him to abandon his sinful thoughts, Jonadab devised a diabolical plan. "Why are you, son of the king, slimming down day by day?" Jonadab asked, feigning concern. And when Amnon confessed his obsession with Tamar, instead of reprimanding him, Jonadab whispered words that would change everyone's destiny. "Lie down in your bed and pretend to be sick, and when your father comes to visit you, tell him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me some bread and prepare food before my eyes, so that I may see and eat from her hand.'" The plan was as cruel as it was ingenious. Using the king's authority and Tamar's innocence, they would turn an act of brotherly care into a terrible trap. And the most tragic part, no one, not even the wise King David, was able to see the true intentions behind this seemingly innocent request. King David's blindness to danger. How did a man as wise as David not perceive the danger? The same king who composed profound psalms, who could discern his enemies' hidden intentions, failed to protect his own daughter. When Amnon made his manipulative request, David did not hesitate. He ordered Tamar to go to her brother's house. Perhaps it was the weight of the crown, or maybe the consequences of his own past sins with Bathsheba that clouded his judgment. Nathan's prophecy still echoed, "The sword will never depart from your house." And now, without realizing it, David was handing his own daughter over to the predator. This was not just a moment of paternal failure, it was the beginning of a tragedy that would unfold like a blood-stained yarn ball. David's silence at this crucial moment would be the first of many, and each subsequent silence would dig deeper into the abyss that would swallow his kingdom. Tamar's tragic fate, innocent and obedient, Tamar went to her sick brother's house. With her own hands, she prepared the cakes he had requested, unaware that each step brought her closer to horror. When they were alone, Amnon's true intentions surfaced. Tamar's words, preserved in scripture, reveal not only her despair, but her wisdom. "No, my brother, do not force me. Such a thing is not done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing." She tried to reason with him, even suggesting he speak with the king, a desperate attempt to find an honorable way out of that terrible situation. But Amnon, blind with his obsession, did not listen. The Bible tells us he was stronger than she and paid no heed to her plea. In a matter of minutes, obsessive love turned into hatred, a hatred greater than the love he had felt before. And Tamar, the princess of Israel, had her life shattered in her own brother's chambers. Tamar's cry echoed through the palace halls, but the true horror was just beginning. Cast out as if she were the culprit, she covered her head with ashes, tore her colorful royal mantle, the symbol of her purity, and left crying out loudly. A princess who entered bearing cakes, left carrying a pain that would change the destiny of a nation. King David's deafening silence. Tamar's screams ceased, but the ensuing silence was even more deafening. The Bible reveals that when David learned of everything, he was very angry, but he did nothing. Not a word of consolation for his daughter, not a punishment for Amnon, just silence. A silence that weighed like lead in the palace corridors. Tamar, once radiant, now lived desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Her silent tears fed a storm forming in her protective brother's heart. And Amnon? He continued living in the palace, protected by his status as the firstborn, perhaps even boasting about his impunity. For 2 long years, this deadly silence hung over Jerusalem. 2 years in which every family meal was tinged with unresolved tension. 2 years in which Absalom spoke neither good nor bad to Amnon, but his eyes spoke volumes. While David was preoccupied with kingdom affairs, a familial time bomb was making its silent countdown, Absalom's patience and plotting revenge. If David's silence was deafening, Absalom's patience was terrifying. For 2 years he waited, planned, and calculated. The Bible shows us a man who knew how to turn his fury into a meticulously crafted strategy. He didn't just want revenge, he wanted justice, even if it was by his own hand. The plan was simple and brilliantly cruel. Sheep shearing banquet, a traditional celebration that no one could refuse. Absalom invited all the king's sons, but his target was only one. First, he requested King David's presence, knowing the king would decline. Then, he insisted on Amnon's presence, the firstborn, the heir to the throne, the violator of his sister. "Wait until Amnon's heart is merry with wine," were his instructions to the servants. Death would come at the moment of greatest relaxation, when the guard was down. And so it was done. In the middle of the feast, when the wine had already dulled Amnon's senses, the order was given. The sword that Nathan had prophesied continued, its bloody work in David's house. The aftermath, chaos and civil war news arrived at the palace distorted. Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Chaos ensued. Once again, a cry of horror echoed through the palace corridors. But this time, it wasn't the cry of a raped princess. It was the lament of a kingdom beginning to crumble. Amnon's murder was just the beginning. Like a stone, thrown into still waters, the death of the firstborn created waves that turned into a tsunami. Absalom fled to Geshur, his maternal grandfather's land, leaving behind a devastated father and a shocked kingdom. For 3 years, the rebellious son remained in exile, while David's heart was consumed with longing. But Absalom's return did not bring peace. The seed of rebellion was already planted in his heart. With his extraordinary beauty and natural charisma, he began to steal the hearts of the men of Israel. Gradually, he turned the people's sympathy into a weapon against his own father. The initial violence against Amnon evolved into a conspiracy that would divide the kingdom. The Kafah rebellion exploded like a long-dormant volcano. Absalom proclaimed himself king in Hebron, forcing David to flee Jerusalem barefoot and weeping. The same father who had remained silent in the face of violence against Tamar was now reaping the bitter fruit of his silence. The palace that had witnessed the rape of a princess now saw the rebellious son lying with his father's concubines in front of all Israel, a public declaration of contempt and usurpation. The high price of silence. The price of David's silence was paid with blood and tears. Absalom's death, hanging by his hair in a cedar tree and pierced by spears, was the climax of this family tragedy. David's lament echoes through the centuries. "O my son Absalom! O Absalom, my son Absalom!" But it was too late for regrets. The kingdom would never be the same. The royal family was shattered. Tamar remained desolate, a princess whose tragic destiny served as the trigger for a series of events that almost destroyed Israel. The prophecy was fulfilled. The sword did not depart from David's house. This story teaches us that silence in the face of injustice has a terrible price. When those in power and authority choose not to act, when parents turn a blind eye to their children's suffering, when justice is stifled in the name of convenience, the consequences are devastating. David's throne survived, but his family was torn apart by a violence that began with an ignored act and ended in civil war. An eternal truth about silence and complicity. This millennia-old story brings us a timeless truth. Silence in the face of injustice is a form of complicity that can destroy entire families. What began with a sick obsession and an act of violence turned into an avalanche of tragedies because of simple silence. A father who did not act, a kingdom that remained silent, and the price was too high. How many Tamars still live in silence today? How many of us, like David, choose to look the other way when confronted with difficult situations in our families? What happens in our homes, businesses, and communities when we choose the convenience of silence over the courage to act? Each of us has a role to play. Whether you are a father, mother, brother, leader, or friend, your silence or your voice can change someone's destiny. Do not let fear or convenience turn you into an accomplice of injustice. Because, as we have seen, the price of silence is always greater than the cost of courage. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Click the subscribe button and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos on biblical stories that transform lives. And don't forget to watch our video on the true price of forgiveness, the story of Joseph and his brothers, which you can find right here. I conclude with a reflection from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Silence can be deafening, but your voice can change everything.